This is the Free Radicals podcast, and I am your host, William Lowen. This is the second season, the 500-year-old story of the Zurich Anabaptists. Episode 4, St. Anna's Fire. The end of the year 1522 is approaching, and the church in Wiedekon, just outside of Zurich, Switzerland, needs a new priest. Willem Reublin comes highly recommended by Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich. He's roughly 40 years old and has a good education and plenty of experience in the pulpit. Following a few days of meetings with families from the congregation, one of their older members agrees to show him around the building. It's a small church in the country, a simple building on the side of a hill. The sun is setting, but there is still enough light to see the building, and the fires burning in the city of Zurich are still visible further down the valley. After a short tour, the two men sit down on the front pew. "So, Father Reublin, what do you think of our little church?" Please, you can call me Brother Reublin, but yes, I have been inspired by the people I've met. They are hard-working and kind-hearted with a hunger to hear the unfiltered gospel. Yes, they are. Some will even do the extra walking to listen to Master Ulrich preach in the Grossmünster. That's why they are excited to have one of his students preach here. But how long have you been in Zurich? I arrived here from Basel in autumn. I heard about the gospel Zwingli was preaching, and I had to come to hear it for myself. The students around him are perhaps the truest Christians I've ever met. Yes, some of our people heard you preach at the Fraumünster, and they liked what you had to say. Did you preach the same way in Basel? Yeah, I did, and thousands would come to hear me speak, but I was not preaching in the old way. So when I spoke against the Mass, and the people were excited, well, the old leaders got angry and sent me away. And that's the kind of gospel we want here, too. The people are ready, and the leaders, they support you. Well, another thing you should know, I'm not afraid of using colorful language at the pulpit. Some people don't like to hear that. We are farmers. Out here we know that the crops always grow a little better when someone throws a little manure around. Well, that's a relief. It's a relief for us, too. We were hoping to have someone at the pulpit in time for Advent. Word got out that the church in Zurich was going through their own Reformation. Among critics and authorities, there were discussions about declarations of heresy, intervention tactics, and political and military allegiances. Among those who were politically neutral or theologically indifferent, there were discussions about political instability, external authority, administrative processes, and moral character. But there was another group, the sympathetic people who saw religious reform as a way of restructuring their own communities and even nations in a more sustainable, equitable, and even maybe profitable ways. This last group was mostly commoners, but there were a few political and religious leaders who drew inspiration from movements like this one. Some of them were close enough that they could come and see for themselves what was happening. But for others, they were no longer welcome where they were, and what they heard made them think that maybe Ulrich Zwingli's Zurich would be different. At least it could offer them the kind of refuge they needed. At best, this could be the inauguration of a new kind of church, the church that could show the rest of the world how church was supposed to operate. And Willem Reublin was one of those men. He was a priest in Basel, drawing crowds of thousands to hear him preach. Even the official records say that nobody in Basel had ever heard someone explain the scriptures so well. That is, until he said that the sacred symbols of their cathedral were in fact not sacred in any way. This controversy would follow him to Zurich. He wasn't the only man in the area who disagreed with the use of sacred symbols in Christian worship. He wasn't the only priest with that opinion either. There were rumors that Zwingli wanted to remove the statues and paintings from Zurich's cathedrals. Leo Judd was the priest at St. Peter's Church in Zurich and the pastor of the Aitenbach nunnery. In the summer of 1523, he started preaching that Rome shouldn't prevent clergy from getting married. And soon, many of those nuns were asking to be released from their vows of celibacy. Leo Judd would later marry one of those nuns. And in the fall, he started preaching that sacred art should be removed from Zurich churches. When people started taking his advice, the council decided to resolve the issue in a similar way that they had tried before. Back in Constance, deep within the cathedral complex, the bishop sits at his desk looking at a familiar document. "Yes, Father, you wished to see me." I do indeed, Johannes. I see that we have been invited to another debate in Zurich. Were you aware of this?" I was, Father. The messenger who brought the notice asked me if I would attend." And what did you tell him?" I explained that you and your representatives have a full schedule of ecclesiastical responsibilities, so our participation was unlikely. "I see. Perhaps I should have been consulted about how you might best represent my wishes?" Of course, Father. I beg your forgiveness. I trusted that your view had not changed since the last debate." "You have judged wisely. We would have no reason to expect a more civilized and proper debate than what you experienced last time. In fact, I see they have invited an even larger audience than what attended the previous event." "Yes, there might be 1,000 people there to hear this debate. I cannot imagine how they believe this will make things better. It was already bad enough that the last debate was decided by the common merchants of their town council, and now they wish to discuss serious theological issues to a crowd of peasants, butchers, rabble-rousers. It seems to me, Father, that you are more worried about this debate, though, than the last one." "I am. The last one was simply to determine whether or not Ulrich Zwingli was a heretic. Now, heresy is no small matter, but heretics will come and go, and they will all eventually succumb to the natural consequences of their crimes. This issue is different. If you remove a heretic, he will soon be replaced by another one. But if sacred art is destroyed, it can never be replaced. And we have a great many beautiful and powerful pieces of sacred art within your bishopric, Father." "Yes, we do. And I've just commissioned a new altar piece that I think will be magnificent." "But why do you think they will be destroyed? Zwingli is only talking about removing them, and from what I hear, the wealthier families are already talking about buying the pieces they like and even donating them to sacred houses in different parts of the empire. Do you know who will be at this debate arguing on Zwingli's side for the removal of sacred images and objects from our churches, chapels, cathedrals, monasteries? I asked the messenger, and he gave me a few names. Heinrich Bullinger really never leaves Zwingli's side. Leo Judd, the pastor at St. Peter's in Zurich, he started all of this off with a sermon against images, so he'll be there. Willem Reublin, a new pastor in Wittekon, should be there. He defied the bishop in Basel over sacred objects. Maybe you heard about that, and that's how he ended up in Wittekon. Balthasar Hubmeier should be there too. He's the one who studied with Johannes Eck, isn't that right? Yes, I believe it is. Christoph Froschauer, I think, will be there. Yeah, the man doesn't miss a chance to sell his books. Anyone else? Zwingli has a circle of scholars around him in Zurich. They will be there. I hear they are quite eager. So, priests, pastors, and scholars? And who won't be there? I'm sorry, Father, I don't understand what you're asking. The men that you mentioned, they might be strange. They might be disrespectful. They might even be heretics. But they are scholars. They will present biblical arguments, however simplistic and ignorant they may be. But there are men whose opposition to sacred images is rooted in a desire to pillage, burn, and destroy. Their voice will not be raised in this debate, but those violent men will be emboldened if Zwingli wins. And if that happens, no painting, statue, or stained glass window in my whole bishopric will be safe. The second theological disputation took place in Zurich from October 26th to the 28th of 1523. And neither Hugo von Hohenlandenberg, Bishop of Constance, nor Johannes Faber, his representative who attended the first debate, were in attendance. Balthasar Hubmeier couldn't make it either, but there were many scholars on both sides of the issue. And so many people from the general public came out to hear the debate that they had to move from the council chambers to the great cathedral, the Grossmünster, where Zwingli preached, to accommodate the crowd. And many arguments were made from the biblical to the traditional, from the philosophical to the practical. Many people spoke up, including Conrad Grebel. He was one of the eager students in the study circle. In the end, the town council decided that, yes, the images should be removed from worship spaces in Zurich, but gradually. The council promised to work out a plan ensuring that the transition happened in a safe, respectful, and orderly way. And as a result, almost no one was satisfied. The old believers, as they were starting to be called, like the Bishop of Constance and his assistant, those Christians loyal to the Pope, or what we would call the Catholics, insisted that these objects were still very much sacred. They continued to argue that they shouldn't be removed from churches, they shouldn't be desecrated, and they shouldn't even be touched. Other people were unhappy that the changes would only be phased in gradually. The people in the study circle around Zwingli, especially the more eager ones, like Felix Mons and Conrad Grebel and the newly arrived iconoclastic priests like Willem Reublin and Johannes Breitli, they were disappointed, even feeling betrayed that something so clearly against the plain reading of Scripture would be allowed to continue. But they were trying to restore the apostolic church, the biblical early church. They weren't trying to destroy the church of their day. And finally, there were angry peasants. For some of them, the untouchable sacred images in the church were a reminder of the corruption of the wealthy landowners all around them. And sometimes the wealthy landowners, the ones who collected the rent, taxes, and tithes, were the churches, monasteries, and cathedrals that housed those sacred objects. Ulrich Zwingli, together with the Zurich Town Council, promised to work out a plan for the gradual removal of sacred images from places of worship, but not everyone was willing to be patient. "40 kilometers away from the city, but still within the administrative region of Zurich, lies the small rural village of Stammheim and its chapel to Saint Anna. For centuries, Christians had come to Stammheim on pilgrimage to pay tribute to Saint Anna and to see the sacred statue of her. That is, until June 15th, 1524, when the chapel was visited by Hans Wirth. He was the Untervogt, the local bailiff or lieutenant. Hans Wirth arrived at the chapel of Saint Anna in Stammheim on the morning of June 15th with a small group of villagers standing resolutely behind him. As a pilgrimage site, the door was not locked, but Hans still knocked on the door. Not a gentle rapping with his knuckles, but a steady thud with the side of his fist. A confused elderly priest came to the door, and when he saw the crowd, he beckoned the other church officials to join him. "Good day, Father." Good day, Herr Untervogt. Are you here to pay tribute to the saint, or do you have other business in mind?" "Our purpose is clear, Father. By the authority granted by the Zurich Council to the parish communities to decide on matters of religious images, and with the support of these good people behind me, we have come to remove the idols from this chapel." A younger man, a caretaker of the chapel, approaches the door with his arms crossed after hearing the voice but not seeing the crowd. "Idols! These are sacred images, Herr Untervogt. Objects of devotion that have served this community for generations. Saint Anna herself watches over us from within." The times have changed, Brother Jacob. The pure word of God, as preached in Zurich and now understood by many here in Stammheim, teaches us that we should not venerate graven images. These statues distract from true worship and can lead to idolatry. But, Herr Untervogt, what my young friend is trying to say is that this chapel is dedicated to Saint Anna. Her statue is not an idol, but a representation, a reminder of her piety and her role as the mother of the Virgin Mary. The faithful find comfort and inspiration in her image. Comfort that is misplaced, Father. True comfort comes from God alone, through faith, not through the worship of wooden images. The mandate from Zurich grants the communities, like Stammheim, the right to decide. And many here believe it is time to cleanse our churches of these distractions. A few discontented villagers do not speak for the entire community. Jacob, These men are armed, and the Untervogt is a proper government official. We must speak respectfully. Herr Untervogt, many local Christians still hold these images to be sacred. Our chapel hosts pilgrims from across the empire. Whether or not you see her image as sacred, Anna is still valued by this community. The sentiment of a significant portion of the community is clear. Furthermore, the edict of the Zurich Council extends to the entire Zurich territory, and the spirit of reform calls for a move away from these practices. We will proceed respectfully, but we will proceed. We have come for the statue of Saint Anna, the two valuable retibles, and the banners. Please, Herr Untervogt, consider the impact that this will have on the faithful. These images are a part of our tradition, our history. Their removal will cause great sorrow and division. The division is already present, Father, because those who cling to old ways and those who embrace the purity of the Reformed faith are already divided. It is our duty to follow what we believe to be the true path as illuminated by Scripture. Where is this statue of Saint Anna kept? You will not enter. These are holy grounds. I have no desire to harm either of you, but I have the support of these villagers behind me. We act in accordance with God's will and the directives of the Zurich authorities. You need to step aside. We will take the statue and the other items. The statue is made of wood. It is not worth your lives. Gentlemen, there are other church officials and pilgrims here. Your presence may alarm them. So if you will promise to leave us unharmed, I will direct you peacefully to our beloved image of Saint Anna. So with the Untervogt's promise, Jacob reluctantly stepped aside. A small crowd of worshippers gathered, watching with a mix of anger and sadness over the removal of their revered statue, and the growing clarity that they would never see her again. On Wednesday, June 15th, the Council of Zurich released a mandate on images that called for the controlled removal of sacred images from the churches in the entire Zurich territory. And just over a week later, on Friday, June 24th, Hans Wirth had received the mandate, assembled a squad of 18 villagers, and entered the chapel of St. Anna to remove her statue. The following Sunday, June 26th, Hans Wirth burned the statue. This incident of the burning of St. Anna's statue in Stammheim does not stand out because it was an isolated incident. The Sacred Images mandate from Zurich inspired a variety of similar events throughout the region. But this one is different because of how revered the statue of the mother of Jesus was to local Christians and pilgrims. In the Zurich region, Hans Wirth was held up by many as a hero of their Reformation movement. But elsewhere, especially among the Orthodox Catholic leaders of the Swiss Confederation, Hans Wirth was a criminal. So they sent an officer of their own to capture him on July 10th. But enough local villagers answered the bell and were able to prevent his capture from happening. A week later, the same officer tried and succeeded to arrest a different pastor within the same movement, a man named Johannes Eschli. However, a vigilante mob, including Hans Wirth, chased them and tried to free their friend. The mob gave up when they realized they wouldn't be able to catch up and decided they would send an angry letter instead. But by this point, they were near the Carthusian monastery in the Swiss village of Ittingen. And since they were tired and hungry from their long and arduous journey, the villagers stopped at the monastery and demanded food and drink, especially drink, from the monks. It wasn't long before the leaders of this mob of villagers lost control of their group, and the monastery was effectively taken over by this angry mob. And over the next few days, the group would vandalize the sacred images at the monastery and even burn down a portion of the building. Eventually, local forces were able to regain control of the monastery and arrest their ringleaders. Listeners of the Munster story may remember that there was a takeover of a monastery by a group of angry, unruly reformers in that story as well. It's hard to tell, but it doesn't seem like many of the people actively destroying church buildings and images later joined the Anabaptist movement. But this story does give us a window into the social and political realities of the Reform movement in Zurich. The mandate on sacred images that inspired Hans Wirth to burn the statue of Saint Anna was not the first statement from the Zurich Council on the subject. It seemed that no matter what they said, a large group of people would be unhappy. It was the Zurich authorities that eventually arrested Hans Wirth, but the leaders of the Swiss Confederation insisted that he be given up to them for trial. Zurich reluctantly conceded under the condition that Hans Wirth's life would be spared. And these Swiss authorities ultimately decided that his crime was too great, and they reneged on their promise. Ulrich Zwingli held this against them and refused to participate in a theological debate in Basel years later because of what happened with Hans Wirth. Whether the concerns about sacred images and the other theological issues that the Catholic authorities held dearly were brought up peacefully or violently, the Catholic Church and its supporters made it clear that they would not tolerate deviation. Zwingli and his friends on the Zurich Council had a delicate balance of leading a theological reform that they felt strongly about, while also not deviating so far that the Catholic authorities would respond with lethal force. Either a military attack or the arrest, abduction, or assassination of key Zurich leaders were all very real possibilities. Everyone involved was concerned with orthodoxy, the development, protection, and implementation of proper Christian beliefs, but they just all went about it very differently. The Catholics were trying to maintain unity and control, even if that meant using lethal force, just like every empire before and since. The Zurich reformers were trying to maintain a delicate balance of making the changes they thought necessary, while at the same time maintaining enough legitimacy to fend off an attack. Most peasants just wanted peace for their homes and farms, but some wanted justice for what they had lost. Some wanted to see the rich and powerful pulled down from their thrones. But for the study group around Zwingli, orthodoxy meant purifying the church. It meant restoring the early church that they found in Scripture, and one by one removing the distractions and the corruptions of the church all around them. They wanted to build that church properly through the process of debate and discussion with the proper authorities. But when Zwingli compromised and agreed to implement a slower, more careful process, that study group, including Konrad Grebel and Felix Manz, they decided that they couldn't walk with Ulrich Zwingli in that path anymore. What you're going to hear next is a song entitled Without Ulrich Zwingli. It comes from the soundtrack of the musical Shadows of Grossmünster that I wrote and co-produced back in 2007. It tells the story of Felix Manz, and in this particular song, there's a conversation between Felix, played by Michael Terman, and his mother, Anna, played by Alison Howarth and Johnson. They sing about the inner turmoil about working with Zwingli and deciding to leave. I hope you'll enjoy it and tune in to the next episode.
Without Ulrich Zwingli, you're not welcome at church. Without the people's priest, there's no help for your search. Your work is heresy. He makes it credible. To refuse his counsel would be regrettable. Are you ready to oppose the pastor? Can you change the church from outside the structure? Without Ulrich Zwingli, the one who dictates reform, without town council's men, you stray more from the norm. The states enforce church law for Luther and the Pope. Stay in Zwingli's good books, that's all that I can hope. I'm not ready to see you lose your freedom over just one dispute is not a good enough reason.
Without us, Ulrich Zwingli departs from the vision. Without our fellowship, he's inviting friction. We are not diverging, we have not departed. It's Ulrich who has strayed, and we will not be thwarted. We're all ready to continue on our own. If he wants to leave us, his virtue has been shown.
The Free Radicals podcast is written, edited, and produced by me, William Lowen. We can't know what conversations actually happened, but extensive historical research was done to put this story together. Over 500 years of cultural, theological, and linguistic developments complicate this process, so historical and artistic choices were made. I hope you will stay tuned for the next episode.